So, welcome for the first ever podcast of the Resonance Science Art click with music in the background. We don't have a title yet. But today we are with two amazing guests. We have Chris, the one and only Chris Baas, Rotterdam legend.
Prop.
Prop. Bring some fine tunes tonight, but also we will have a deep discussion with our other amazing guest, the smartest psychologist of the year 2014, Lorenzo.
Yep.
Here you go. Nice, great to have you here. I'm really excited to have it today at this great location at the Zaagmolenbrug. And let's start with a short introduction round. Chris, pump it up. How's it going?
It's going good. I'm busy. I just graduated.
Oh man, congrats.
Cum laude, man.
Well done.
Nice.
Yeah, so from my cultural anthropology master.
Very nice.
And as you know, I'm very busy with musical projects now.
Yes.
Which is also relates to my thesis, and I hope I can talk about it later with Lorenzo and you. So
cool. Let's definitely keep this topic on the back of the hat. Very interesting. Lorenzo, how is it with you? How are things going lately?
Thank you, Raphael. I'm good. I must say. Enjoying the weather, and I was quite busy with work. I've been as well as I've graduated 2 years ago. I mean, just from my bachelor, but studied psychology. Absolutely loved it, but I had to do something different. So spent some time in the past 3 years doing research and working for startups. And now I was lucky enough to be chosen or to have a conversation with a professor at the Erasmus University, who at the very end offered me a job as a learning innovator for the Erasmus University. So cool. Quite busy, but very much fun.
Nice. Going the different ways, like not straight from the bachelor to the PhDs.
Yeah, that's the next step.
Nice, very cool. Before we start it off, I have one little question, and I'm just curious because I just popped my mind lately when I was in my kitchen and had my kitchen towel. And I thought, how many kitchen towels do I actually have, and what's my personal relationship towards these kitchen towels? And so I was basically wondering, how many kitchen towels do you have, and what is your relationship towards them? Afterwards, I reveal my answer as well. So, Chris. Right?
Yeah, well, as you know, because you're my friend, I like to be in the kitchen. So every kitchen has some kitchen towels,
Yes.
You gotta, you need kitchen towels, but you need tea towels. You need towels to dry your hands.
Yeah.
And if you're really getting into it, you can have a wide variety even within these two forms of towels.
Wow.
But what do you do when a towel falls down on the ground?
It's hard.
It's hard because some people put it back as if nothing has happened.
That's what I do. Yes.
I'm more of that type of person. Well, it depends how long it's on the ground. The thing is, I have a cat as well. So if it falls on the ground and then it's covered in cat hairs, then it's a lost cause. But I do have two favorites. They're both blue. And they're from the brand Chicks Love Food. I'm not familiar with the brand otherwise. But good towels.
Man, why are they your favorites? So I'm curious. Is it
they're just the prettiest. They're blue and they have gold lining. And they're the newest. So
Sick. Fully get it.
That's deep.
All right, Lorenzo, how many do you have?
I think I've got too many, but my problem with towels is that they really need to be clean. I find it difficult. So when towels just fall on the ground, it's no longer a towel for me.
It loses the concept of a towel as soon as it drops. All right.
The concept comes back. It becomes a rag, something you can clean the floor with, but it doesn't become really the towel, because towel relates to hands, and I don't know. It's no longer a towel if, you use it with your feet.
All right. Do you have a favorite as well, or are you?
No, I don't have a favorite one. I mean, blue is my favorite color, so I probably would like Chris's ones.
It's beautiful. It's blue and it's gold. So, you know.
Double jackpot.
That was like what? Oh, that's great answers. For me personally, I do have around 6, but I share them with my roommates, and I don't have a very nice steezy one. They're all kind of thick, and I'm a bit jealous of as well Chris's towel, and I learned that I should not pick up my towel as soon as it touches the ground, because I do this fairly frequent.
Yeah, because then what happens? Then you dry your dishes, you know. And then you forget, and then you end up, cleaning your mouth, and then, I mean, if you're like with...
Keep it clean.
Keep it clean.
Hygiene is important, especially in these times. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that was a deep conversation already. But let's don't waste too much time, because we actually have a live set today prepared by Chris. Whoa. Doing it all right here on this laptop. Do you want to say something about it?
A little bit, but I think I'll speak about it maybe afterwards more. But it's just actually like a loose project I'm working on. I think it'll take the form of one track later on. And it's a little bit inspired by my thesis and people that I've been working with in London, which I'll talk about later. So yeah, maybe listen to it first, and then we can talk about it. And yeah, maybe it'll be interesting to see what your interpretation is before I explain. I don't know. We can have a look.
No, definitely. Let's bring the music, and then we just jump right back into discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll just be short. I don't think like more than 5 minutes. We'll see. Maybe I'll get in the mood and it'll be longer.
All right. But a dramatic drum is introducing.
Do you hear it?
Yes.
Good.
It's a part of our cultural history and the way that black culture has impacted on British culture. You know, it's like Black History, where we have Black History Month in this country. Black History Month is important because not only is it important for black people, it's very much part and parcel of British history. You know, it's part of British history. We weren't taught it in school, but it's British history. It's black history, but it's British history. We've had an impact on the society in many ways, specifically in terms of culture. Why shouldn't it not be part of studied like everything else? You know, it's a part of the fabric of British life, British culture. It's important.
My use of the word basement, underground, you know, and it's a culture that lives underground, and it comes up ever so often, and people get infected by it, and it goes back down, and then, you know, before you know it, there's reggae in nearly every pop tune.
black culture has impacted on British culture. You know, it's like Black History. We have Black History Month in this country. Black History Month is important because not only is it important for black people, it's very much part and parcel of British history. It's part of British history. We weren't taught it in school, but it's British history. It's black history, but it's British history. We've had an impact on the society in many ways, specifically in terms of culture. Why shouldn't it not be part of studied like everything else? You know, it's a part of the fabric of British life, British culture. It's important.
In my use of the word base and basement, underground, you know, and it's a culture that seeps, lives underground, and it comes up ever so often, and people get infected by it, and it goes back down, and then, you know, before you...
Whoa, Chris Baas, everybody.
That's all for now.
wow, covering the Zaagmolenbrug and a deep cultural flair. Very interesting composition. Maybe also, Lorenzo, I'm curious, like first reactions.
Two comments comes to my mind. The first one, I think, would have been super lovely if all the people also around the studio would have heard the music, I think. I don't know. Would have been an interesting reaction. I would have at least loved to see that. But regarding the song itself or the composition itself, the music itself, I don't know. It's funny because at the beginning he said, you know, maybe I'm going to ask you guys to tell me what you think about it. So, and then I started to think about that. And the more I thought about it, the less I was thinking about until it was at the very end when there was this very I don't even remember the song, and at that moment I imagined ducks.
Wow.
And I imagine ducks because
that's maybe because there's ducks swimming.
yeah, that's for sure. That's where the inspiration comes. But I imagine, you know, like to me it all summed up as a conversation, and then I just imagine a conversation between two different ducks.
Oh wow!
Because, you know, it's like, and then you should be quiet, you know. So there was to me this tension between I don't know, different poles of trying to push or pull each other, and it reminded me just the conversation that you see between two ducks.
Oh wow!
Next, that's interesting. I like it. I mean,
described.
it's very much. I like that you picked up on the conversational aspect because obviously there's some speech clips that you heard in the background, but they're like heavily. There's a lot of echo on them, and now because I was doing it live and I can sort of, I'm not sure how it sounds. I'm not sure if the speech was clear enough, but yeah, it's nice that you picked up on the conversation thing because it's actually clips from speeches of people that either I interviewed or are related to my research in London.
Yeah, can you give a quick update on what is this research
so
about?
I was in London last year to do research on the British Jamaican sound system culture. So that came out of reggae music and is heavily influenced the dancehall culture in Jamaica and London, where lots of Caribbean people live.
Yeah.
And the research was very much approaching these sound systems as a platform from which the participants could voice their could shape their own identities, but also could voice their opinions on the reality around them. So it gave them a little bit of a political positioning, and also could be seen, especially in the 80s, as an educational platform, because for a lot of young black kids in Britain, they didn't learn about themselves a lot in school. So the sound systems provided them with a lot of history and a lot of conscious philosophy about themselves and where they came from and what their position was in society and how to approach that. So you hear a lot of talk about things about chanting down Babylon and stuff like that, taking down the system. Yeah. And my research very shortly said my research focused on that, but in the British context. And the speech, one of the speeches I used was from Linton Kwesi Johnson, who was this dub poet. And his speech is very much about the impact of Jamaican culture, reggae music on British culture. And he posits that, it should be seen as a British thing, because now it's very much positioned as something foreign, something Jamaican. But by doing that, you're denying the impact that all the British Jamaicans have had on that cultural form. Yeah. And my research was basically consisted of talking to a lot of these people, hearing their stories, and then putting it into a thesis format where their stories can be heard and their dissatisfactions can be heard in another place than just the dance hall or sound system. And this is just my sonic interpretation of that a little bit. Hastily done.
Nice. I would like to pick up on 2 points you mentioned. Actually, first, like the sound system as a tool for spreading a voice, for spreading like identity, and actually then on the second run, like this identity or this music then shaping the cultural aspect of Britain, on bringing a culture that is already there. To just basically include it in the mainstream culture. Mm-hmm. And I see a very nice bridge here as well. So like, especially like education, like the definition of education, how can you define it? And how these tools can have an impact on an actual culture or lives of students, lives of people. And luckily we have another expert in the room here. Can you maybe shortly, bring you like your work, maybe introduce it, like what you're doing right now and how it might actually relate to Chris's musical experience?
Thank you. No, exactly. I also picked up a bit of the same words that you, Raphael, picked up from Chris' descriptions of the song, because he described the sound system, as a kind of as an educational platform where people can not only, he said, shape their own identities, but also to have a voice. And it's very interesting because now if you bring that back into the discussions that we have nowadays about, education, whether it's like primary, secondary, high school, or even universities, higher education, that's the whole discussion about, how can we give more voice to the students? How can we make sure the students, have more ownership towards their own learning process, to be more responsible of their own learning process, So they are the so-called, you can call them the actor of change, rather than being the one that are subjected to change. So it's interesting that, this has been a discussion that, maybe in the past 10 to 15 years started to happen more and more often, especially in few universities. So now there is a strong attention, to create there is this term in research called student-teacher relationship or student-teacher partnerships. Yeah. And what they simply try to do, and I think that's what every university worldwide is trying to do, is exactly to do what the sound system did in the 80s to those communities, which is, how can we empower students for them really to raise their own voice, to get ownerships, to be able to be the actors of change. And that's a discussion that you actually see almost everywhere, at even an institutional national level. And so my question, if I want to say something, ask something in relation to this and in relation to what Chris said before about those communities in London is, in which ways would you say that those people have used those sound systems that have enabled them to, practically, to maybe raise their voice or to have more of a role or have more of a stance?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's actually a question that in the last chapter of my thesis, I look more pragmatically at, okay, but so this is nice because it's much more of a symbolic platform, I would say, where you take the stage that is not given to you by wider society. But in the last chapter, I really raised the question, but how does this affect wider society? Does it actually have an impact beyond just the Caribbean community? And I think it's a very difficult question to answer, and it's not something that I can do like in a couple of months research. But I do think, because of course you see that the format and the cultural impact that reggae dancehall culture and sound system culture has had on British culture, and especially in London, is huge and is noticeable. Like just walk in the street, you see sound systems. You have Carnival is really big. It's like almost part of London's identity, I would say. The language that they speak is full of words that are coined in or of Jamaican origin or relates in some way to sound system culture. And I'm not I haven't even started talking about the music yet, which is like hugely impacted by sound system culture. But then on a political level, you see, I asked the question, but what did this actually do to the position of these people? And arguably you could say, the position has gotten a bit better, but there are also still huge problems and a huge lack of recognition for their contribution. Because even if people say, Jamaica has had a huge influence on British culture, it's still seen as a foreign influence, and that's the whole issue. I think that Linton Kwesi Johnson and other people have raised is, how long does a community need to be in Great Britain for them to be seen as British? How long before it's just a British contribution to the culture? I think that's a very important question. Where is this need coming from to exotify and to other this influence in a sense? The other problem I think with this is, what you see a lot is the sound system culture, reggae dancehall culture has influenced all these things, but it's mostly, I would say, in form and not necessarily in its message. And therefore I would say that the political potency that is there in the sound system, I feel hasn't really brought major political effects. It just it gets stuck at a symbolic level, and I think it could be used more efficiently, because I see a lot of potential there,
Yep. I would like to hook in on this this potential you mentioned. But basically, if we have the two sides, on one, you mentioned like this emergent system of dancehall culture being a tool for this society to kind of express himself, but then also the limitation of being an external party and the system around it not fully accepting it. And on the other side, maybe you, Lorenzo, you're more busy with kind of trying to give students those tools and trying to make them supported in an already existing system to further push it. So basically, I have two questions. It's like, how could the education, like as it is now known in universities, support like a movement as the dancehall culture, and how could the dancehall culture, like the example of it, of this emerging tool, how could this be used to further push forward education and make it an actual like closer to a identical self. Like, do you get the question? That's a bit of a complex.
I think I might get the gist of the question. Just direct me if I'm completely missing the point. But it's interesting what you ask because you first phrase it in a way. So what can education do, to support such a movement, and what can such a movement, bring to educational, environment?
Yeah.
And when it comes to the former. I'm now a bit skeptical or negative about education, so I don't see really, if I must be cynical, how education can really support such a movement when education itself or higher institutions are not really supporting the education itself. To me, you see higher institutions that are yes focused on education, but what they're mostly focused is research, is getting recognized worldwide. All the focus on mostly, and especially Dutch universities, about research. And teaching comes kind of next. So most professors are actually here because they want to do research and not because they want to teach. So you have this within the university itself, an environment that is not really conducive to growth or to support when it comes to students. So I doubt that they will be able to be conscious enough to be able to bring that aspects to other sides of society. But it's interesting that at least they recognize this. At least here in Rotterdam now, their main motto, the university here in Rotterdam, the main motto is about having an impact on society. So creating this bridge between this ivory tower that used to be onto the society. So I think there is this first awareness, and that's where the movement comes in and how can movement can support, because yes, education now is still, I think, in many ways quite backwards, and that's where I think the second part of your question about how can such a movement support the education. I think education needs, people outside of their own fields. Education needs. And there is the lack of creativity in the educational environment, I think, is quite huge, So education needs to tap onto different reality. Now we talked about transdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, but what they simply do, they just simply take their own friend from a different department and put them together. Whereas, blurring the boundaries with very different kinds of education, that is like, cultural education, that is music education, could definitely only benefit the development, also this awakening that hopefully university are starting to have.
Yeah. So, question for Krista actually: how would this potentially mentioned before, and the benefit that Lorenzo is now basically pointing out from this lack of creativity and this lack of cultural awareness? How could this thing like dancehall culture or the things in your master thesis, the topics, how could this be used to further enrich education?
I think it depends how you define education. To be honest, I think what Lorenzo said is basically my point too, in the sense that I'm not an expert on education, but I know that I see a lot of educators still thinking in this very rigid format of what education is, very traditional, and I think, the question, what is education? In the sense of my thesis, it was much more about it. It came from a lack of knowledge about yourself, a lack of seeing yourself represented in history books, a lack of reading about yourself, hearing about yourself, and seeing yourself on stage.
Like a lack of sound systems.
Yeah. And then the sound systems was like, because first, because it's basically, the basic principle was always there was music, there was DJs, and there would be guys on the mic, and they would tell their stories. They would toast, is what they say, how they call it, or chat, or rap, whatever you want to call it, their stories. And then people would relate to that. They would hear, "Oh, I'm like you. I hear I'm witnessing and experiencing the same things," and this I feel is sometimes not recognized enough in education. Like the power of identifying with the topic, and also with the educator. you know. So I feel like it's, and I'm not saying like all the educators have to be like recognizable to all the students, because I don't think that's manageable. But I think if we think of this in a little bit more, you know, because it can have a huge impact if you're being taught about something in a way that relates to you, and in a way that you want to be a part of that educational process as well. So in that sense, I think, but if we take this sound system, dancehall culture, and look at what it can add to education or contribute to education, I think that's definitely one of the things. And the other thing is just, it's very, of course, the educational aspect of sound system culture lies in its identity, you know, in its recognition, but also in its cultural and political critique. And yeah, I think we could also learn from that a bit more. It's very much focused on decolonizing the mind and raising your consciousness about yourself and about the world. I think education in the Netherlands is starting to go through a process now of also doing this a little bit.
Yeah.
So
basically taking the voices of individuals from whatever cultural background, just take them serious and try to learn from it.
Yeah, but also realize on what type of mindset the current educational system is built, you know? You want to add
Yeah,
something?
exactly. It's interesting you started to kind of question or put at the center of the discussion the definition of education. So yeah, I think that's very interesting. I was mainly talking about higher education institutions and the environment, I mean. But it's interesting how even in those institutions, there is a certain awareness or a certain shift in regards to the definition of education, because I completely agree with you. We have always thought education, imagine in institution education, so to say, as that environment of, you know, knowledge transfer, you know. And so we always differentiate that kind of called institutional education to kind of what you described, I would call it, let's say, live education, you know. That kind of encounters that those people in those community used to have and grow, being able to tell their stories, you know. And it's interesting how now, in a way, those two kinds of education, so to say, are blurring the boundaries, in the sense that you now see in psychology, in many fields, in educational sciences, a focus from a shift in focus from this really knowledge transfer kind of education where everything is concentrated in your head. So everything is abstract, is just about knowledge and reasoning, to what I would call it bodily education, that you kind of involve different senses, you know. It's not just about reasoning, it's about smelling, it's about touching. And that has to do with, you know, you being involved in the educational process, because it has to do a principle that we try to implement in my project, in my project at university, is this principle of head, heart, and hands. Meaning, you know, you need to reason about what you do, but also be able to act and do something with your hands. And the heart relates to something that you're passionate about, you know. So that would be a much more complementary kind of education that goes beyond just book knowledge. And
yeah. That sounds really nice, actually. I think it's really. I was in writing my proposal, I was looking at theories about how knowledge can be kinesthetically embodied, so in movements and stuff. I didn't end up in that direction in the end, but I think this is very unexplored in education. But I also find I'm not an expert on that, so I also find it hard to imagine like how this could be implemented. But I think it's interesting to think about these things. Like,
can I give you just two examples about this kinesthetic learning?
One sec, can I maybe break down the level of hardcore language? Basically what you said is like the education was more of like a knowledge transfer, so somebody more educated educating somebody else, giving the knowledge further. And now the shift goes more to like actually experiencing education. Could be in a way of like your own personal self, like doing sport, being fit, but also having like a kinesthetic like movement in your in the way of learning, like kind of making your brain ready to take in information. Yes, can you please take it further?
No, exactly. And I mean, two possible kinds of this kind of movement education, kinesthetic education. I mean, one is, they're totally two different ones, but just to give you two possible options. One is what we know in psychology. You know, there is this branch of psychology looking at the connection between your body and your brain, and how, you know, learning something is related to the movement with which you learn that particular move, you know. So, for instance, if you start to learning sentences about up and down movement, you know, and then you move up and down, you know, alongside those sentences, you're much more likely to remember stuff. You have many cases where in a math elementary school, if you actually use gestures pointing at numbers, you know, just the math understanding of these children, it goes just on the roofs. And in higher institution, what we see right now is there are so many buzzwords about experiential education, service education, that is simply about go out from the classroom and do a project, be in the life, you know, talk to real people rather than just spending time on your own. And that's already a huge steps if you look at the big higher institutions.
Yeah. I mean, like, especially like the kinetic one, like just one perfect example, I think, for kinetic would be dancing in general, just having a movement to a rhythmical pattern that your brain analyzes, and you basically put some movement inside
I've got one thing, super interesting study about if you get two children to swing, okay, and if you make them swing, sing at the same pace at the same time, you know, they're gonna turn out to be the minutes afterwards much more cooperative, much more helpful to each other. And so if you can do the same when you go with a group of people and you walk in the streets, you know. So if you walk with the same steps, you really enter into a different chemistry, because you really synchronize your own body with the bodies of other people, you know. And that's how movement, and that's very much linked to creativity. You know, we know walking is much better for creative processes than simply sitting down on a desk. And that's where we understand, you know, that let's go beyond an ivory tower, a desk.
One question that actually, what's the main thing that makes this repetitive pattern very helpful for learning? Is it also more like that there is a certain like resonance beats, or is it basically more the physical activity of the process? Or do you know
the causal link between the two? I personally don't know the causal link. I know that there is theories and hypotheses about that, especially the example of the children, or swinging, or you walking the streets next to a person. There is this hypothesis about synchronicity of time and synchronicity of time between people, because we used to grow up as living in a lot of small communities, and we were kind of following the same tempo of life. You know, we are going fishing, coming and having dinner together, and I think there is this evolutionary hypothesis looking at kind of synchronicity between people and how that kind of make them more in tune to each other.
I'm actually super happy that these are the parameters, so that is your explanation for it, because talking about the synchronicity of people together, and then think about like back to your first example of like the dancehall cultures and sound system of people being maybe misunderstood and suddenly being together, making music, making a beat, joining a community, building that community, and learning from each other's input. And this kind of resonance fairly, like, for me, makes a great link between those already. So do you have any reaction on that?
Yeah, just for the thing that I think is important in relation to this to the dancehall thing in terms of education that I haven't said yet, but I think might be interesting also for your perspective, is especially earlier, but now still. It's also very much about autonomy. You, like you mentioned, of dancing together might create this harmony. And I think this is also the case, like if you're in a space with people that have gone through similar things, and you're hearing something that relates to you, done by people that are like you grasp autonomy over what you're being taught and heard, and how you dance, because your movements are also politically regulated in a sense, right? Yeah. Especially if you're black, I would say there's a different. There's definitely some movement policing, and especially within Jamaican culture, you know, if you dance with your butt or something, there's always some conservative, traditional white woman who says you can't do it, and also, so I think in terms of this, if I think still in terms of the educational potential, I think this is an important thing still, and it could also be. But I'm curious how it relates to your idea of then the movement also creating some sort of harmony. Or I'll wait till this party boat passes.
One single man party boat.
Because I'm always thinking not so much in a psychological perspective, of course, more like historical, cultural, and I was wondering how maybe if you had any ideas about. So let's say we stick to this example of creating some sort of educational sound system thing. Would that? How do you think this movement, this I forgot what you called it, but or maybe just a better question is how could you think of an example where you could see that actually leading to something within education, so some sort of movement in harmony, and what would the benefits be of that
in an educational context?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about trying to think in your field right now.
There was actually. Tell me if I'm kind of answering your question or not, but you kind of sparked this, at least you reminded me of this example where there was this professor, one of the funkiest professor I've ever met. Was not here in Rotterdam, but yeah, it was a very interesting professor. And what happened, imagine this professor is having a super boring lecture. She has to have this boring lecture about some formalities, about exams and stuff and regulations. And imagine that halfway through the lecture, she stops. She looks at everyone and she starts singing, singing and clapping the hands, And by doing so, completely fearless, she just got the whole lecture hall together. Let's imagine 400 to 500 people. 400 to 500 people clapping at the same time, singing with her, you could see how the energy between before and after completely changed. Hearing a boring lectures, obviously after 10 minutes, all students were completely bored, lying down on their chairs and playing on their phones. But man, trust me, this moment of getting together everyone, of really, again, energizing, not only about synchrony, but also about movement, going back to what you just said, not only brought the whole students together, but it also energized together, and it's a unforgettable memory, Yep. And I mean, this is a very, very tiny example on how you can think about synchronicity in an educational setting. Yep. But you can think also.
One question actually there, like you're saying, it's being an unforgettable moment, but what did it make unforgettable, and especially what did it do with the input and also the throughput of information with the students? Like, what's your guess?
I mean, we are certain in education that, information coupled with emotion leads to long-term retention, So if you don't have an emotional aspect to what you're learning, kind of is what also Chris said before, if they're not really involved, if they must, kind of be involved in what you're doing, energized, they must be liking, kind of feeling that you're responsible for that project. When you've got that emotional attachment to a certain project, man, your growth and your learning is limitless,
Yeah. Kind of, I think a simple example for that might be like a child on a playground, like enjoying learning, just having fun and moving and just taking things together. And there with actually building all these stable memories, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. That's a very nice wrap up for this topic. I mean, especially, and what I'm actually when I just also now heard Chris talking about how this kind of resonance and the voice and breaking this system where people more or less felt trapped in, it more and more reminds me of like basic concept of creativity and the basic concept of innovation in general. Like when you just take different views which are not fully in line with the basic standard, and you just put it to the next level by having this intrinsic motivation, having this like kind of feeling of home, feeling of security, and therefore push forward an outdated system and make an innovation that actually lasts, what you said, like that stick to people's minds and continues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it now for a bit longer, but I do think the real power in the sound system will always be for agitational activities rather than how do you say it, like just shaking the leaf, you know. It's always a counter-cultural phenomenon, I think, even if it gets incorporated into let's say, well, into any system, but even if it gets incorporated in the educational system, I see its potential maybe more as something to stir things up, you know. I think that's where its potency could fully be used. Maybe, yeah, because you can argue that if such a thing is included in the mainstream system, where is its value? Because its value lies very much in its marginality to the system. If you understand what I mean. So I don't know. It's
can you give just with the time we are heading towards the end? Can you maybe give an example of how, for what the last thing you said, how would this actually work out? Well,
I don't know. Maybe something in the lines of, I don't know, student protests or whatever, or more
colors and paintings and graffiti at university.
I don't know. Just
creating channel of voices,
yes, maybe that's the right terminology. Giving a platform for voices, but then because it's such a specific cultural thing, it's also strange to think of it. For me, it's very strange to think of it as something that could ever be implemented in some sort of educational system. But I definitely think we can learn from it, you know. And
I don't think you will ever implement in the way that it is in the street nowadays in London, but if you take the principles of it and see, you know, why it's so genius, or why, you know, or just look at religion, you know, why is religion so genius to create those infrastructure? And you can ask the same questions about such a movement, you know. Why do you have 100 people there beating, or, you know, in sync, where if you are in a classroom with 100 students, everyone is doing their own little things and no one cares about anything, you know. So lots to learn from it, absolutely.
All right, I would also if we have, do you have any ideas how to actually change the common system? And let's take maybe university education, as you are part of this. How could we change it with the input from that conversation?
Based on, let's say, the chat that I'm having right now with my work and the conversation that we just had, I would say two things that are also kind of interrelated to each other. So it's a matter of maybe, it's two things that are so related. One is a matter of culture and one is power relations, and they are very much related to each other. So we talked a lot about, you know, this, I kind of criticize this transfer knowledge aspects where you have a teacher and a student, you know, and that's the problem lies because there is a huge power relations that kind of probably stick to also what Chris said before. Why are these people there in Britain for 50 years and still not acknowledged as having contributed to British culture? I very much related to power relations and focusing on shifting the power relations. So now going back to my context at university, you know, pushes as much as possible for raising student voices, you know, and really make them and giving them a voice, a room for really contributing to something that is actually concrete and meaningful. You first of all start to shift the power relationship, because now it's just a matter of being afraid, you know. Professor will benefit by changing this power relationship as much as students would, you know, but they're not aware because they're in the comfort bubble, and it makes sense, you know. But if you start to switch that power relations, you might be able really to generate a culture that is conducive to a certain student voice or raising your voice platform. But to me, yeah, like it's gonna be a long-lasting process, but it's really a matter of small little steps leading to a cultural change rather than external solution from the outside or something that is not really organic.
Yeah.
So breaking down like this power relation in general and try to profit from, like, first of all being vulnerable and opening up to this opportunity, and then profit from the cultural exchange.
Perfetto.
Thank you. Very nicely said, Lorenzo. Chris, do you have any closing thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, well, I agree with Lorenzo. I think I liked your point about the just in general, thinking about the hierarchies and power structures in education is just something that needs to be thought through. And if we look at my topic, then you see that there's it's educational, but it's also of course there's some hierarchy in terms of just some people who are better than others, but there's in the sense that anyone can jump on a sound system and start chatting. Anyone can be the educator. But you have to be good, you have to know what you're talking about. And this is something, maybe we can make education also a little more accessible in terms of where the knowledge comes from, and not only in this top-down type of way, I don't know. That's maybe my last point on this.
Everybody can be an educator, but know your shit. Basically.
Yeah. I think this is also in the sound system culture, it happens so organically, I mean, if you talk shit, they'll know,
Yeah.
It's just because you're talking about someone's experiences. So if it's shit, and if you're not doing it in an eloquent way and in a way that people can relate to, then you're not good.
Yeah.
So
first of all, thank you for this conversation. Like, my brain cells are firing. Like, I'm happy we found like such a simple link between basically commonly unrelated topics, but coming to a very nice and steezy link. However, Chris, you still have some music? Maybe, like, if you want to close off with.
I can do another little project. It's all work in progress, but
perfect,
and all related to my work of the past few months. So
we're in the vulnerable learning process anyway, so we are more than happy to get a last live set from Chris.
Yup.
Nice. Also, for fairness reason, any last words from you, Lorenzo? Or
Not really. Just thank you, Raphael, for just this moment.
really. Yeah, thanks. I hope also to listen to the continuation of the podcast series, see who else you invite, and see how you can from very different places come to some sort of understanding and learning environment from each other's expertise.
thanks, man. We staying tuned, and hopefully with the next episode soon.
Cool. 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 Cool.
Thank you.